Good morning again to another entry of Snow Cone Diaries. Uh, Tuesday, October 5th, 2021. For those that are into numerology, you've got a 10, you got a 5, you got a 20, and you got a 21. So someone can figure out how all this stuff pieces together afterwards. One of the reasons why I date all my files for some reasons. Also could be OCD. Anyway, for those of you who have been here before, welcome back. For those of you where this is the first time, my name is Juan Valdez. Written a couple books about metaphysics and about theology. Been practicing yoga for 30 plus years, and I'm a systems engineer. Build, maintain, and manage massively scalable, secure enterprise infrastructures. That's what I do for a living. So today I wanted to extend a little bit of the topics that I talked about in my previous couple of talks, diary entries, I call them. Maybe with a little bit of audio visual today, I'm using Zoom. So I have the ability to move back and forth to some of the images that I've created and sort of compiled that help. Picture speaks 1,000 words to help kind of spell some of this stuff out. But I want to follow up on some of the discussions that we've had about the mind in particular and how it's structured. And we talked a little bit about the conscious mind versus the unconscious mind. And that's typically how, from a Freudian and Jungian perspective, how the mind is understood. Let's say Kant had a slightly different model, but he wasn't a psychologist or a cognitive psychologist or anything like that. He was more of a philosopher, but he also, in some senses, provided some of the framework, I think, for cognitive science as we understand it today. And ultimately, that's where some of this stuff is headed. It's headed to Kant, how he looks at the world as it appears versus the world as it is, and then how his system of intellectual architecture, thinking architecture, thought architecture can be extended and modeled to reflect the metaphysics of awareness, which is the piece that I've kind of come up with that fits a lot of these things together. So I've been watching a bunch of Dolores Cannon videos on TikTok primarily. Her and Bashar are actually fascinating figures, and really otherworldly. I think it's fair to say. People would call it, from the scientific community, would call it, sort of people that either come from, discuss, or deal with these things called the paranormal. It's sort of, over or above what is normal. And this whole idea of paranormal is reflective of the concept that, you basically have science and knowledge as the academy teaches it and protects it. And then you have everything that's outside of that. That's, nice to have, but isn't really core scientific knowledge. And, I talked a little bit about objective realism and how this is sort of, the new scientism, the new religion that came out of the Enlightenment, was that, not only from a Nietzsche perspective, God is dead, but that in fact, science and data and, objective realism, causal determinism, that's the only thing that's true. And anything that doesn't line up with that is outside of the domain of science, quite literally. And so you have this sort of perspective that's embedded in the language in terms of how these disciplines are described, whether it's psychology, whether it's clairvoyance, whether it's ESP, whether it's telekinesis, or all of these sort of what we call like psychic abilities, right? Which there's a vast evidence of at this stage of the game, and research about, are sort of outside of the domain of what's real. And so, from an objective realist perspective, subjectivity is non-scientific, right? And that's the trick. Okay, that's how they've gotten everybody to believe that if you see things in your mind, you're going to be checked into an insane asylum. You're not then not only you're not a scientist, you've lost your mind. And we have a place for people like you. That's the way society has been structured. This is massive, insane in the health and the medical community that have ostracized and pumped these people with drugs. And they've been doing this stuff for years. This is since the Salem witch trials. You know, it's a different method, but and more effective, more scalable, right? Build systems. You got to build scalable systems, right? And so the world of subjectivity has been sort of cast to the side. And yet meditation and yoga and what the Vedas teach you is, you know, and what Jesus teaches you, right? The kingdom of heaven is within. So I understand science is true, right? Because we got this, God didn't know what he was saying. And then so we had science, and science is objective. And then, you know, what's going on in your mind. I don't know. You must be a crazy person. I had a whole conversation about this yesterday with this woman that I'm using that's helping me with work through some of these ideas as I try and sort of bridge these two worlds. Katrina Sacred Seed Alchemist or something. And she's great on TikTok. I highly recommend her. Anyway, so and bear with me as I go through my notes and notes about how I can package some of these things. I usually talk just from my mind, but there's a couple of ideas here that I want to make sure that I get out. So Dolores Cannon is this interesting figure who in the 70s and the 80s, I guess, learned hypnosis and was able to do these things called past life regressions, which basically question somebody and get information about who they were before this life. So again, most of this material that I've talked about presumes that you've made the deduction that you are not the body. Okay. That there's something about you persists beyond the death of the physical form. If you haven't gotten there, again, you got to go back, you got to do your work, and you got to figure that out. But that's all of the material that we're going to discuss is presumes that you understand that to be true. Part of what I talked about in the first couple of minutes helps you understand why it is that there's this massive push and momentum for you to not believe that that's true. The entire intellectual edifice of the modern world is based upon that. This is what Nietzsche said: God is dead. Now what? I mean, this was, you know, part of his insight. And you had World War II, you had Stalin, you had tens of millions of people were killed in the 20th century. We dropped bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I mean, we're lucky the world is still around. We're this close, apparently, in the Cuban Missile Crisis. This close. Blowing the world to bits. Anyway, so Dolores has this technique that she developed, I guess, but she must have learned somewhere, and then she honed it to go into tap into what she calls the people's subconscious. And she's written 15 books, okay? And UFOs, Atlantis, and Nostradamus, who she develops a relationship with, which is, I haven't even gotten to that yet. The whole stuff about Jesus and the Essenes, 2 books there. I mean, fascinating library material. I've heard her talk, but I haven't really read her work yet. I just started reading her work. I got 8 of her books. I went through one of them in the last 36 hours. I basically had a minor existential crisis by the time I was finished with it. I mean, it's completely mind-blowing, and it confirms a lot of my findings. But what I want to talk about is not the material. I don't want to talk about the material. We'll get into some of that. But what I want to talk about is her technique. Okay. So part of what I'm trying to get at here is if you once you understand the nature of this body in this form, which is a mind-body complex, you know, Descartes, res cogitans, res extensa, right? So you have sort of this system, okay? Once you understand that you are not your physical body, right? You start to understand the next deductive step, which is you are a machine of sorts. And so Homo Mysticus Ex Machina was the title of one of the books that I wrote last winter. This whole idea of, if it is a machine, well, how does it work? What's its potential? Let's understand the vehicle, right? It's like we got dropped into a car, we left the dealership, and like there's no owner's guide, there's no ownership manual. Just like, hey, son. But apparently there's all these capabilities that we weren't even told about. We didn't even know that there was a difference between us and the machine. There is. Okay, so how does it work? What's its engine, right? How do you optimize it? How do you tune it? These are the kinds of things that we're going to be talking about from a very grounded perspective. And so her work in particular is relevant to these discussions because she has a specific technique that she uses. And I want to ground that in the philosophical framework, which is Vedanta, but it'll also be Kantian ultimately. And what she basically develops a technique where she can put people in these sort of what she calls somnambulistic states, and which basically means, walking through sound. That's basically what the word means. She's created the word, but it's this state, which is clearly where you're wrapped in sound in sort of a hypnotic state that she can then have a conversation with. And here's the piece that I want to tie together. If you read her books, they're structured in such a way, there's some introductory material, and then she interviews certain people that come to her for these hypnotic, this was in the early days before she got very famous and was doing a lot of talking and traveling. She would actually do a past life regression for them, and then she would tape it. And then the book is a little bit of intro material, but it's really just the transcripts. So she's having dialogue with the patient while the patient is in, the deep hypnotic trance-like state. Okay. So, and what she does is she does past life regression. So she goes back in their memory banks. Okay. And she asks the questions, and she gets very detailed answers from a variety of time periods, and all sorts of information starts to be revealed to her once she hones this technique. That's how she builds all these narratives around Nostradamus and Jesus and these scenes, because she basically connects with people that claim to have lived in these different time periods. And then she has multiple witness accounts, basically. And from that, she pulls together, as an investigative reporter would, or an historian, actually, you pull together a picture of what happened. You're basically interpreting the data. She's getting the data. Okay. So I want to look at the process by which she's getting the data. Okay. She's having a conversation with somebody. Who the hell is she talking to? You got to stop for a second and just consider who she's talking to. Once you ask that question, the logical answer is she's talking to some sort of a higher self. What does that mean? That means from a metaphysical standpoint, that person has access to the collective memory banks of your core entity that is reflected by this human being. That's who she's talking to, whoever that entity is, right? You think about it from an object-oriented database perspective, okay, from a systems perspective, okay? And this is how you need to be looking at this, because it's a system, okay? And it's been engineered. So you need to understand that, because this is where all these pieces come together, okay? This person has access to all of the events that have occurred for this entity for a given time period, which goes back well beyond a given lifetime. That's how this entity is defined, okay, from a database normalization perspective. Who is this person? When you're trying to answer that question, you look at it from a data perspective. You say, well, I don't know, but this person has access to all of the data. So the individual is then bound by, at some level, who you are is bound by this set of events that impressed upon you that you have a memory of, that you experienced ultimately. And that you have sort of an intelligent, conscious, an intellect some sort of being that has, is related to directly the experience of those events. I mean, that's by definition, that's really the only thing that you can say, okay, based upon at least the Dolores Cannon technique that she's used, again, irrespective of things that she found. This is Atman. This is the soul. Okay, so now out of religion and spiritual land, and we're now in cognitive science land. Okay, basically cognitive science land and yogi land, because yoga, the science of yoga, is effectively talks about these different mental states and who they are and how you identify with them and what the relationship is with that, with the cosmos. That's what Vedanta is taught by the rishis well back into, before civilization was, before, history, written civilization, okay? So this is Atman, this is who she's talking to. So now she calls it the subconscious mind. That's what she calls it. Okay, but she's outside of the realm of psychology there, because you have the conscious and the unconscious. Subconscious is something different, sort of. It's akin to, in some sense, it's related to the concept of the collective unconscious of Jung, that has a collective component to it. Architecturally, it's sort of similar, but she's using different language. So I don't want to confuse the two necessarily. She is talking to and having full discussions with the subconscious. The subconscious mind can go back lifetimes ago and remember events, as if you can talk to the subconscious as if he's there. It's as if they're a witness in the scene. That's the nature of the descriptions that she gets. She's able to corroborate some of this evidence with historians, and then also from other people that claim to have been in the area or lived in a certain time. So again, she's triangulating this information from talking to tons and tons of sources, or at least several different sources, right? What makes you think you don't have access to your subconscious mind? She has access to it. She's figured out a way to tap into it. You don't think that you have access to it? Okay, now we go into meditation land. So Atman, subconscious, a higher self, right? This is this idea, this notion. This is supposed to be the charioteer. I call it intellect. Okay, a higher mind. But you have this element of free will. You have this ego, which is in some sense distinct from the higher mind, or at least you have the illusion of distinction. That's the game. So if you're in a machine and the world is somehow virtual or designed in a specific way, and you have certain laws of free will, now you understand why the world's so special and why there's a lot of interest to protect it, its viability. I don't think it's the first time that we've destroyed things around here, let's say. You can get into ancient history, Graham Hancock, and ancient civilizations and the gods and the pantheons. So all that stuff as it relates to theology reconsidered, we probably need to revisit at some point, but we're not going to do that today. So on the one hand, she has revealed something very specific about cognitive architecture, let's say. And you need to understand that, not only if you're a practicing yogi, but if you just don't want your life to be miserable, you need to understand how this shit works, okay? So you're a body of energy, and then you have sort of a lower mind and a higher mind that work, hopefully, in somewhat in congruence with each other, okay? But there is a relationship between the two to go through your life, okay? What she's also helping us understand is that this higher mind, which she calls the subconscious, lives in a place that has access to all the events that have occurred to that individual. Let me say that again. This entity, whatever this thing is, lives in a place, in a world where past, present, and the future all can be experienced and accessed from a single point. Dolores Cannon doesn't go too much into the future, but the implications are there. She's doing past life regression. She can go the other way. I don't even know if she knows that she can go the other way, or probably what is the case is she knows she can go the other way, and she's had stuff revealed to her about the future, but she's not allowed to talk about it. And she mentions that and alludes to that in some of her talks. She knows it's the full boat. So you have a world beyond time and space that you're in direct communication with. Okay, this isn't some indirect, hypothetical, theoretical idea. She's in direct communication with this level of reality. So I'm going to say just a couple of things about this level of reality, and then I'm gonna try and pull some of this stuff into how it maps to Kant, and then I'm going to close. So, how is it that time and space can exist in sort of a collapsed way like that? But time and space and causality may be a function of this world, but there is an existence, a level of existence, a level of being, a state of being that exists beyond it. Well, okay. What's to say that that's not more real than the three-dimensional world that we live in right now? And I'm not saying that this world is unreal. I'm just saying that we've identified that there exists another world where these laws, basic fundamental laws and properties of physical reality do not hold. From a theoretical standpoint, I've talked a little bit about this. Dolores Cannon confirmed some of this. Greer, actually, the UFO guy who has some interesting things to say about consciousness, also confirms this. If you relax the constraints on the speed of light, theoretically, you have a framework where that world can exist. There's a notion of time dilation. When you're moving super fast, close to the speed of light, things slow down, time slows down. This is this whole interstellar concept, if you saw the movie with Matthew McConaughey. Yes, if you're able to break the light barrier, which they claim can't be done, things collapse to a single point at some level. But you say things, you're still in objective, realistic frameworks. There is a reality where time and space collapse, where all that exists. Now, first of all, you have the notion that time and space sort of collapse at this, in this place. There's a being that exists there, okay? But then you also have, I don't think there was meant to be revealed right now, but you have, this world has some very unique properties, let's say, and you have a direct line of connection to it. So people like to talk about the matrix and things are unreal or whatever. I don't like to go there because I think it's important that people stay grounded, because we need to preserve the world, and pretending that it's some sort of an illusion is not helpful. Okay, we do have a task to preserve this place for future generations. But we need to understand that this way of being, pleasure, pain, physical form, time, space, causality, is a game of sorts. Biochemical, physical game. Game relative to the fact that if we die, we continue to persist at some level. So this is part of what Dolores Cannon shows us. And I don't even know that she's focused any at all on this, but it's this vast material as an investigative past life regression reporter she's identified. But at the same time, it's the technique about the nature of the architecture of mind that she sheds a tremendous light on. And of course, once you start relaxing time and space and causality, and you put the ability to exist in another dimension where those things are not non-constraints, basically, what becomes possible in this world is a whole different question now. You just open the door to the paranormal is The physical world is sort of bendable. In time and space, you see this with clairvoyance. People see into the future, past life, regret. The notion is it's sort of can bend, and they talk about wormholes and all this stuff, but it's not quite as linear as we would like to be, as we've been led to believe. And that's an important thing to to understand. So as we kind of talk a little bit about Kant and philosophy in particular, he has the first major revolutionary concept and idea that he presents us with is that we will never know the world as it is, but we can only know the world as it appears to us. Because everything that we experience, all knowledge, it's through the mind, through the senses. And he breaks the mind in sort of in an intuitive sort of right brain and then left brain sort of cognitive way. And he sort of builds up a cognitive architecture, talks about different pieces of processing and how basically he models out an information processing architecture for the mind. It's one of the reasons why his system appeals to me. But we talk about information processing, we talk about information storing. We can then start talking about Turing machines. We can start talking about DNA. And we can start talking about massive stores of information as we go through life, as we experience things. Stuff is stored in the Akashic records, and we can get a sense as to what kind of machine we are in, because it exhibits certain properties that we can know and that we can find out. So hopefully that was a somewhat enlightening discussion about, what is the nature of the mind? And based upon its nature, how do we tune it? How do we work it? And then how do we apply it to our daily life, right? I mean, ultimately, that's where a lot of this stuff is set and designed to. If you practice meditation, these principles should help and guide you in your exploration of the mind, which is effectively what the practice of meditation is. Yeah, you want to be enlightened, but you need to understand the relationship between the different core aspects and components of mind, if in turn you are going to be able to rise above that, because it's an edifice. And if you want to climb the edifice, you got to know how to get there. You may have a couple of flashes, but you want to understand the different components well enough that you can understand the things that you experience in meditation. And then in turn, you can take those things that you understand, those principles, those things, and then you can adapt them and manifest them in your physical life, in your physical form. Because that's what we were meant to do, more or less. Anyway, have a great day. I've got a little one that's going to school soon. I got a couple of jobs I need to do to make sure that they can get out of the house in time. Everybody have a great day. Namaste.